Dear friends, you're very welcome to this reflection on nurturing family values in pandemic times. Clearly, it would be an understatement for me to say these are challenging times. And again, it would be an equally major understatement to say that of all aspects of our life that has been hit the most, it is family life. Because things have changed dramatically for us in family. And not just in family itself, but in the family of the church, the family of the small Christian communities, the family of religious communities, the family of our presbyteries as priests together. We've all been challenged like never before. And the challenges have been varied. Just to spell out a few. So many, to begin with, were affected with COVID. And that brought a new challenge, fears, apprehensions, worries in the family. Some, with God's grace and blessing and a lot of care, recovered. Thanks be to God for that. But it took its toll on the family. Others, unfortunately, lost their loved ones in the family, in the very home. And that we can never, ever evaluate the pain of losing a loved one to COVID. And then so many have struggled with their jobs. Some have been laid off. Others, massive pay cuts. So many others struggling to make ends meet and maybe pay fees of children in school and college and university. Others struggling to pay their rents. Financial crisis. Or again, as we know so often, forced and cooped up in a lockdown situation, without the freedom to do things we normally did, to go where we normally went, to take a break, to have a coffee in a cafe, to drive by the seaside, to go on a vacation. All of this we don't have anymore. And it's been a good 18 months and we are not sure how long this will go. I just mentioned a few of the issues. There are others. Relationship issues between couples, between parents and children, between siblings. All of this adds to high levels of anxiety, tension, worry in family life. And so the question is, how can we as Christians inculcate, nurture good family values that will enable us to cope in the pandemic? And so I'm going to present you with a word. And I will use this word as an acronym. As I take each letter of this word, and from the letters, I will seek to present some important virtues for family life to cope with the effects of the pandemic. The word itself is a Greek word. It is pathos. Now, in original Greek, pathos would mean a sickness or a suffering. From this Greek word, we get our English word, in medical terminology, pathology, which is the science, the study of the kind of a sickness. Pathos. In many ways, our families today are struggling with a pathos negatively. A suffering, a sickness, the pandemic and its effects. But gradually this word in Greek, pathos, has come to be used in English for immense feeling. Immense feeling. To have pathos means to feel deeply, to suffer with. To display pathos is to display emotion in a positive sense. The opposite of this would be feelingless. It would be hard as a stone, unmoved. And that's not very human. As human beings, we all have feelings. And to display pathos is to display the emotion of pain and suffering in a good sense. And so, a vital, necessary element, fundamental for family life in the midst of the pandemic, is a beautiful English word which has wonderful consequences for our life and family, which has its roots in the word pathos. And the word in Greek is empathia, which in English means empathy. Empathia in Greek means to suffer with, to be alongside someone in their pain and suffering. That's the Greek meaning of empathia. To feel the pain and suffering that someone else is going through, and to be with that person in his or her pain. That's what empathy means. Empathy means I feel in my very being what my brother, my sister, my friend is going through, and I accompany him or her through empathy. So, empathy is the fundamental virtue we need in family life today to cope with the pandemic. In order to have empathy, we need some qualities to grow in empathy. So I'm going to take the word pathos, which is the root word, and I'll start with each of the letters, P-A-T-H-O-S. We start with P. P, patience. Patience is a virtue fundamental to grow in empathy. In our world, which is hurried and buried, and we tend to have so many things happening, we need patience. We need patience to look at our world situation. Patience with the scientists and researchers for the vaccine. Patience with amazing work done by doctors and medical staff. Patience because we do not know how long this is going to take. We are invited to grow in this virtue of patience. To be patient with each other in the family is fundamental, because we tend to be aggressive. We tend to demand immediately. We tend to have or want our needs met quickly. And we know this doesn't help. This only irritates and aggravates. It aggravates the people at home. It aggravates me. It frustrates everyone. Patience with each member of the family is allowing for people the way they are, to manifest themselves the way they are. To be patient with one's spouse, to be patient with one's children, to be patient with one's grandparents, to be patient with one's parents, with one's siblings. The more we grow in patience, empathy increases, and the family is that much at peace. Maybe it's good to ask yourself, what is your patience quotient? If you were to put a measure 1 to 10, where would you mark yourself with regard to patience? The more patient you are with the world, with each member of the family, and most of all, patient with yourself, the happier we are. So that's the first, to to grow in patience. From patience comes another important virtue that goes along with patience, that helps growth in patience. The letter A, acceptance. It's so vitally important to accept our situation. The more we learn to accept our situation, the quicker it is that we come to terms with the situation and we find ways to handle the situation. The biggest challenge is we deny. For so long, people were denying the pandemic. And then people are denying vaccines. And then they are giving in to all sorts of theories instead of accepting the good of the vaccine, accepting the intelligence of society, accepting the God-given grace that much can happen through good science. Accepting a situation then results in change. Similarly, accepting each other at home is fundamental. Most frustration happens in family when we tend to make the other person into my image and likeness. And that results in frustration. The challenge is to accept each other with each other's uniqueness, wonder, with each other's beauty and also difficulties, and above all eccentricities, because all of us have wonderful qualities and we have some eccentricities too. And the challenge is to accept. The more we accept, the happier we are. But if I am driving myself to change the other into my image and likeness, that's not going to happen. And I end up frustrated. Acceptance among spouses. To accept your spouse the way he is, she is. To accept your children with his or her remarkable goodness and qualities and thinking and ideas. Accepting your siblings will make for an increase in empathy, will make patience easy. And so, ask yourself, what's your acceptance quotient? What's the level of acceptance that you manifest? What helps acceptance is another A, adjustment. I cannot change a brother of mine in my Redemptorist community. These are his natural ways. If I try to change him, I get frustrated. So I accept him and I adjust myself to him. So for example, one of my brothers in my community, when a joke is cracked, he has a screech for a laughter. And this drives me up the wall. Now, if I keep telling him, don't screech when you laugh, it's going to frustrate him and make him upset, and it's going to frustrate me. I accept my brother with his screech for a laughter, and I adjust to that. I ask myself a simple question, Ival, is it a big deal if he has a screech for a laughter? It is no big deal. I can jolly well adjust to it. And that's the key, to adjust to each other, to adjust to changing situations, to adjust to difficult moments. What's your adjusting quotient? If you grade yourself 1 to 10, how quickly are you ready to adjust? When you adjust and accept, you grow in patience and in empathy. P-A-T, tenderness. Such a vital quality to practice in these days. Tenderness. What is tenderness? Pope Francis beautifully describes tenderness in his encyclical Fratelli Tutti and in a couple of his TED Talks. He says, tenderness is love that draws one close, that is real. Tenderness, he says, begins from the heart and moves to the eyes, to the ears, and to the hands. Tenderness is the manifestation of a love that is soft, that is gentle, that says, I am here for you. Tenderness starts in the heart, moves to the eyes. You see each other tenderly, and that's the challenge. To look tenderly. It's nice to look tenderly at a little baby, but you're also called to look tenderly at your spouse, at your children, at your parents, at your grandparents, to look tenderly. It means to listen tenderly, to pay attention to give of your time to listen to your grandparents, to your spouse, to your children, to your parents. It means eventually to speak. To use your tongue tenderly means to use words that build up and not words that pull down. Words that help growth, not words that destroy. And what are these words? Please. Thank you. You're so wonderful. God bless you. To appreciate, that was well done. That was amazing. Thank you so much. These are words of tenderness. Our speech becomes tender. And you will be amazed how easy family life becomes. Rather than harshness, bitterness, abusive words, tenderness. And then tenderness through the hands. Tenderness to the hands is doing little things each day, time and time again for one another. Pitching in your lot. Taking up the daily chores. There's much to be done. Sometimes you can't have the maid over, but you take your turn in washing the dishes, in cutting the vegetables, in buying things online, or if possible going to the market. Doing your bit. That's tenderness in action for the family, to bring an atmosphere of peace. So, P, patience. A, acceptance and adjusting. T, tenderness. H, humor. Absolutely. For us Christians, we are reminded there is no such thing as a grumpy Christian. St. Paul says, rejoice, rejoice in the Lord always. And again I say rejoice. We are not a sorrowful, mournful lot. We are an Easter people because of the resurrection. So humor must be part of our life. Good humor that lightens up family life. Crack a good joke and make people laugh. Almost every school today of well-being teaches us about the necessity of humor for a life of wellness. To laugh, to crack a joke, to laugh over oneself and one's mistakes, and not to take things too seriously, and not to ponder things too much, but to look at the brighter side, to look at how things can be funny, will make the atmosphere at home lighter. Some people are natural at humor. Others, like myself, have to work a lot at it. But the beauty is, the more I work at being humorous and laughing at myself, the more relaxed I am. So what is your humor quotient? Have a good laugh from time to time. Watch a comedy flick from Netflix or any other source of a good comedy film or a sitcom or a stand-up com. Have a good laugh together. That's H. We come to O. O stands for order and organized life. We all need order. We all need an organized life. And if there's one thing the pandemic is teaching us, is that it's very easy to throw in the towel and lose order and lose organization. So to inculcate a sense of order means to be disciplined. Give yourself, this is the time I'm going to wake up. When I wake up, this is what I'm going to do. Chalk into your day your time for exercise. Chalk into your time for prayer, personal prayer, family prayer. Spend time with one another. Put order, give yourself an organized way of life. Will help us grow in empathy, will help us grow to be a happy family. It's all about discipline at the end of the day. The danger during these days is we indulge because we are at home. We indulge with food, we indulge with drink, we can indulge with things that are not pleasant. But if we are disciplined with the way we speak, disciplined with what we eat, disciplined with what we see, disciplined how we speak, disciplined with our exercise, we are going to live healthy lives. I can speak for myself. I'm a diabetic. And I'm a diabetic for many years now, since 2003. And I thank God for the grace that He gives me every day to be disciplined. To wake up at a certain time, to have my meditation, to calm myself and prepare myself for the day's work, to eat that food which assists me as a diabetic, not to overindulge in anything, to have my daily hours walk and exercise. All of this helps me to manage my diabetes, which God blesses me with the grace of using all the talents in a disciplined manner. We can all do this. It is not too difficult. We got to decide. What is your organizing, order, quotient? How disciplined are you? And the last letter in Pathos is S. S is sacrifice. Nothing happens without sacrifice. In family life, we constantly have to place the other before us. The Holy Family, Mary, Joseph, and Jesus, lived a life of sacrifice. They never thought of themselves per se. Their constant attention was the other. The young virgin was attentive to the baby in her womb. Joseph was attentive to his virgin yet pregnant bride. The two of them attentive to their newborn. They sacrificed so much for each other. They protected each other by placing the other's needs ahead of their own. Jesus grew up in an environment of family filled with challenges, perhaps worse than the pandemic, filled with problems, king wanting to kill him, people criticizing, abusing, ingratitude. But what kept him going was pathos, culminating in sacrifice. No greater love is one than to give himself or herself. In other words, place the other more than myself. And when we live by sacrifice, a husband says, your feelings will always be more important than mine. A wife says, your feelings will always be more important than mine. Parents say, and you do, the children's needs will always be more important than ours. But children need to say, my parents' needs, my grandparents' needs are more important than mine. Sacrifice. Jesus teaches us that. Let's listen to St. Paul. St. Paul in his letter to the Colossians gives us good advice. And I think this advice is very useful for us in pandemic times. He says in the 3rd chapter, the letter to the Colossians, verse 12 onwards, put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassion, kindness, lowliness, meekness, and patience, forbearance, And if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you also must forgive. And over all these put on love, which binds everything together in perfect harmony. Let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in the one body. And be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell in you richly as you teach and admonish one another in all wisdom. And as you sing psalms and hymns and spiritual songs with thankfulness in your hearts to God. Wonderful advice. And maybe in your prayer time as a family, take that advice from St. Paul, chapter 3, the letter to the Colossians, verses 12 and the following. So there you have it. To grow in empathy is a necessity for family life in challenging pandemic times. With patience, with acceptance and adjustment, with tenderness, with humor, with an orderly, organized life filled with sacrifice. I guarantee you, your family will cope. Because as we live empathia, God comes to dwell in us. God makes his home with us. Your family becomes a sanctuary, the dwelling place of the one who is perfect empathy, the one who is perfect patience, acceptance, tenderness, has a sense of humor too. His organization of the plan of salvation and his gift of sacrifice. Let me end with an anecdote. I picked this up. It was sent to me some time ago on a WhatsApp message. The anecdote is about a taxi driver in the United States. It was the end of his shift and he got a call and he went to answer and he thought, this is going to be my last call. So he drove in to an apartment complex and rang the bell, and there was a lady, clearly very aged, but dressed perfectly out of the 1950s. He was stunned to see her, aged but beautifully dressed. And she handed him a little suitcase. He accepted it and he looked beyond her. The apartment was bare. The little furniture all covered up. There seemed to be nothing else. And then she said to him, come on, let's go. So he said, hold a minute, ma'am. He took the suitcase, went down to his cab, put it in the boot, and then he came back to her, held out his hand. And she held his hand, and she said, thank you, young man. You're very chivalrous. And he responded to her, it's a pleasure, ma'am. I am doing what I would expect anyone to do for my mum. And so they walked to the taxi. He opened the door, she sat in, and then he sat into the driver's seat and he said, right ma'am, where to? And she said, this is the address, it's a hospice. I'm 90. I have no family. This is it for me. I cannot live alone anymore. And the doctors have said there's not too much left for me. And so I've decided to go and live in a hospice. And they're expecting me. The taxi driver was moved and he said, right. And she said, however, I have a favor. I'd like you to drive me through the town. And then he said, but ma'am, that's going to take a longer route. There's a quicker way to the hospice. And she said, would you do me this as a favor? And he said, sure, ma'am. And so he began to drive her through the town. And every now and then, she would ask him to stop. And she would say, that's where I met my husband. And then that's where we used to sit in the garden together. And then what was a big go down, she said that was a hall where we danced. And I enjoyed dancing. I was a ballroom dancer. And they stopped and stopped at so many places as she recollected events and moments from her childhood, her youth, her married life, rich with memories. 3 hours had gone by, and the sun was beginning to set. And then she said to him, "I'm tired now. Let's get to the hospice." And so he drove into the parking area, and then through the parking area to the portico. He got out, and there were 2 attendants waiting to receive her, obviously aware that she was coming in. He held her as she came out of the taxi. The 2 attendants took her in. He opened the boot and took out a suitcase, and by the time he reached, she was already seated on a wheelchair. And he put the bag before her. And she said, "Thank you." She took her purse to open it to pay him. And he said, "No, ma'am. There's no charge." And she said, "But you have to live." And he said, "Oh, don't worry. I had enough today, and I'll have enough for tomorrow. But no charge on this." And she responded, "You're chivalrous, and you're also generous." And then he knelt down before her, and he put his arms around her, and he embraced her in a tight hug as she embraced him back, not wanting to let him go. And gradually, as they released each other, he kissed her hands, and she turned to him and said, "Thank you. You have no idea what a gift you have been for me in these few hours." They waved goodbye to one another. With tears running down his cheeks, he walked to his taxi, started the engine, and drove out. And then he just pulled up on the side and began to think. And he said, "This is life. What if I had lost my head and said, 'Why can't I just drop you immediately to your spot? Why do I have to go out of my way?' Or what if I had not accepted this fare and somebody else took advantage of her?" But then he realized life is not meant to moan about, rather to celebrate. He thanked God for the opportunity God had given him. That was pathos. He demonstrated pathos as a taxi driver for the elderly woman on her way to a hospice. Demonstrating pathos is feeling empathy. It's not the great deeds we do that will hit the headlines that are necessary for the pandemic times. It's the little things that count. It's not so much what we do for people, but rather it's how we make people feel. That's pathos. To feel with and feel for and enable them to feel God's love. So, it's all about pathos. Patience, acceptance and adjustment, tenderness, humor, an organized life with sacrifice will help us, parents, children, grandparents, siblings, to cope in these pandemic times, to live as a family. I invite you to pray with me, seeking the intercession of our Mother of Perpetual Help. As we place our families, I place your family, I place your religious community, which is a family, under her maternal, motherly care, protection, and intercession. Hail, Holy Queen, Mother of Mercy. Hail our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we send up our sighs, moaning and weeping in this valley of tears. Turn then, O most gracious advocate, thine eyes of mercy towards us, and after this our exile, show unto us the fruit of thy womb, Jesus Christ. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary, pray for us, the Holy Mother of God, that we may be worthy of the promises of Christ. Amen. The Lord bless you and your families, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. God bless. It's all about Pathos.